This screencast is to support this lesson, Take a Risk. It's lesson 8 from Language to Go Pre-Intermediate. That's by G. Cunningham, S. Mohammed, and it's published by Longman. So here's the student's book page, and you're going to need a few other things as well. Here are the teacher's book notes. They're quite brief but very useful, a few language notes and a few ideas, including a nice idea for a lead-in. Now for this book, at the back of the student's book, they have some extra practice for each of the lessons. So I've made a bigger file and put it on Teams, and it has all of the lessons in it. So you can see here we've got 1, 2, 3 and 4. So if you scroll down, you'll find lesson 8, and we'll come back to that in a minute. And similarly, at the back of the student's book, there is a grammar reference. So I've put all of these together in one file on Teams as well, but you can see here at the beginning, here is lesson 8, and you can see it's the present perfect and the past simple. It's useful to look at the grammar section in a student's course book because it gives you an idea of the level of detail to go into for that level of students. Whereas if you go to a general grammar book, you're going to get all the information about this grammar. What we've got here is the level of information that's useful for pre-intermediate students. And here's another thing that I've put on Teams. It's all of the recording scripts for this book, and we're on lesson 8. So here's the recording script for this lesson. There's also an audio file for this lesson, obviously. Okay, so first thing to do is to take an overview of the lesson, get an idea of what it's all about. The grammar focus is present perfect and past simple for experience. Beware the present perfect, it has several different uses, so we're just going for the experience use here. And it looks like there's some controlled practice and some freer practice, some writing. So it looks like the grammar is well catered for. So where's the context for the grammar? Here it is. It's a listening. So there's some extra skills practice and there's some vocabulary, and the topic is about extreme sports and taking risks. So it's a nice topic for the students to discuss. Let's have a look at how we can start the lesson. Okay, so we're starting off with looking at some pictures of extreme sports and matching the words. Okay. There's an idea in the teacher's book for brainstorming sports at the beginning and maybe even turning it into a competition, which I think seems like a really nice idea, particularly if you've got latecomers coming in. So maybe do elicit some sports beforehand, look at that idea in the teacher's book as the beginning of the lesson, and then move into showing them the pictures, these pictures, or once you found yourself trying to elicit the sports. If you can't, then put up the words and get them to match them. There's an exercise here for listening and then deciding which pattern of stress is used, which I think is pretty nice. You could do that just modelling it yourself, or you could use the audio for that as well. But I think modelling it yourself is probably the easiest way to go. And you can round off that vocab section perhaps by getting the students to decide if they would like to do any of those sports, or which one they would like to do and which one they would definitely not like to do, for a bit of speaking before we move into the listening. So remember, for a listening, you want to set the scene, raise interest, background knowledge first, then possibly pre-teach some vocabulary that might block the students being able to do the tasks. Then there should be a simpler task for the first listening and a more complex one for the second listening. So when I look at a listening or a reading lesson in a book, I think, are all those stages there? So let's see what we've got. We've already raised a bit of interest by talking about extreme sports. And then I think we need to set the scene for the listening. And they're going to be listening to some people who are on an adventure holiday. Okay, so that's what they need to know. You're going to listen to Andy and Paula and Dave. Dave runs the adventure holiday and Andy and Paula are there. I want you to listen and decide if these sentences are true or false. Okay, Andy is on holiday, Paula is on holiday. So listen and see if they're true or false. And then you might want to check that scene. You might say, okay, how many people are speaking? 3 people. Good. Who are they? Andy and Paula are on the holiday, maybe. And Dave is the instructor. Yes. Okay. Good. And then they can listen. And at the end, stop, peer check. What do you think? Share your answers together. And then do a whole class check. And then same procedure for the second task there. Set the scene, and set the task rather, let them listen, and then peer check and then feedback. You might want to pause during this task because they've got quite a lot to listen to and a lot of ticking to do. And then there is another task as well where they need to do underline the correct past, and this really helps them to move into the grammar section. Okay, and here we are in the grammar focus. The students have listened to the recording, they've got a context, they've got some ideas about what the grammar might be focusing on, and now we can clarify the rules. But of course, we'd like to see what the students know first. So there's a lot of really useful stuff here in this box. I like the idea that they have to decide if it's the present perfect or the past simple for each of these sentences. But then here they just seem to be given a bunch of stuff to look at, and it's just not very engaging. So I would suggest to start to make a new slide or a new worksheet with some examples of the target language at the top. And you can take those from the listening task that the students have just done. Let's have a quick look at that. So remember exercise 5 here. They've just done that in the listening, underlined the correct form. So your example sentences can be taken from here. Okay, so perhaps an example of the have you ever question, an example of a past simple question, and an example of I've done, and an example of the past simple. Okay, and have those sentences on a slide. So the students can look at the sentences on the slide, and you could do some general eliciting first. You could say, oh, does anybody know the name of these tenses? Does anybody know why we use them? And just see what the students know. And if they know nothing, that's fine. If they know something, then you'll have learned something there. And then move on to give them some questions to answer so that they can try to discover the meaning for themselves. So these 3 sentences here are useful. Notice that number 1 focuses on form, whereas 2 and 3 focus on meaning. And I think meaning should come first. So I would start off with questions 2 and 3. Okay, put them on the slide with the example sentences and say to the students, okay, what do you think goes in which gap? Do you know? All right. And I guess we're going to have needed to have clarified what the present perfect is and what the past simple is beforehand, so make sure that comes out of your initial eliciting. That should be the focus on the meaning, but I'd suggest you go a little bit further after that. So when you feed back the answers to this, we use the past simple to talk about finished actions in the past. Then focus on one of your past simple examples and ask some concept questions. So it might be, I went skateboarding last year. And you might say, okay, so do we know when it happened? Yes. Is it finished? Yes. Is it in the past? Yes. Okay, and you could even show a timeline with a cross in the past, showing that that was definitely a past finished action. And then when you cover the answer to number 3, we use the present perfect to talk about our experiences. We don't need to say when the experiences happened. Then again, go back to an example. Let's just check what example we could use. We could say, I've played football. Okay, I've played football. And you could say, did it happen in the past? Yes. Do we know when it happened? No. Do we care when it happened? No, not really. What's more important, the experience or the time it happened? It's the experience. Yes, that's right. So you want to clarify those 2 concepts. And if you put the present perfect for experience on a timeline, you can't put a cross. I think you can put a question mark. And that shows that it happened in the past, but we don't know when. Okay. Then we can move on to look at form. all right? And you could bring in this question here, yeah, or you could have a slide with some examples and some gaps where they fill in the gaps rather than just presenting them with all the information here. Now, the difficult aspect of this might be the use of past participles for the present perfect, okay? Students sometimes call it verb 3 because they're often shown, the irregular verbs are often shown in these 3 columns, the infinitive or the base form bare infinitive here, the past simple, and then the past participle. So often students have learnt these in a table of 3 things for the irregular verbs. So if your students say verb 3, that's what they're talking about. And I think you need to try to elicit some past participles. So look at the verbs that are coming up in the practice stages that are coming, and make sure that you elicit from the students what the past participles are of those verbs. Okay, maybe you could play a game, you could put up the verbs, put them into groups, see who can make the most past participles, or you can just throw out the verbs and make it a quick fire round. So go, went, gone, do, did, done, something like that. See if you can liven up that stage. And then we need to do some controlled practice to see if they can control the verb forms. So there's this activity here in the book. Now remember I told you that there were some additional practice tasks that I've put on Teams. Let's have a look at those. So I've gone on to Teams and I've found the L2G, Language to Go, pre-int all lessons grammar practice activities, and I've scrolled down to lesson 8. There's something for the vocabulary here, and then there are 2 different control practice activities. I think what I'd suggest is that you think about your students and have a look at all 3, the one from the student's book, this one here, and this one here, and think which one seems most suitable for my students. Okay, I think probably the easiest one is this one here. This one could be pretty good if you just change the format. I find looking at this in a line complicated, whereas if it were clearer that this is the answer and they're making the question, then that could be really useful. Okay, so adapt the layout of this one, use this one, or use the one in the book, depending on what you think is going to be best for your students. Try it out yourself is the best way to judge it. And of course, once they've done the activity by themselves, get them peer checking, maybe even in breakout rooms to allow as much peer teaching to happen as possible. And then do some whole class feedback, reiterating the rules again. So saying, why is that correct answer? So do we know when that happened, etc. Now we want the students to have some freer practice and some personalised practice. So there's a nice idea here to make questions about 4 of the sports. Have you ever? I find this bit a bit complicated, so I'd probably keep it pretty simple for my students. So make a worksheet with this task on it, okay, and then maybe have some extra things like give them a verb and a noun, like have you ever eaten anything strange? Have you ever visited London? Some extending out from the sports topic, okay, get them to make the questions first, so they've got lots of have you ever questions, and then demonstrate how they can do it as a speaking activity. So the idea is that they would say, have you ever tried skateboarding? And then the other person would say, yes, I have, or no, I haven't. If they say, yes, I have, you want them to ask a follow-up question. So you could leave them to make up their own follow-up questions, but they may need more help than that. So perhaps give them some options. So did you like it might be a normal question to ask. Or when did you do it would also be a useful one. So present them with those 2 questions to use as well. Then set them off in breakout rooms. Have you ever done this? Yes, I have. When did you do it? Blah, blah, blah. Listen in and monitor for any examples of good language use or any errors. Come back to the main room. Feedback on ideas first. What did you learn about your partner? Tell me one thing that you learnt. And then share a document with the correct and incorrect sentences on for the students to discuss, or put some of the corrections into the chat so that you can do some post-fluency error correction. And that's the end of the lesson.